It's a great rainy day here in Cowley County. A great day to continue our backyard history with episode 2 when we talk about murder and drama in Cowley County. This episode takes us to Udall and mostly Winfield. So let's go there. But before we do that, we have to start at the way beginning, a little bit north of Topeka in Jefferson County, where one night there was a dance. And a young fellow who's about 19 or 20, named Charles Cobb, decided to attend the dance. Well, he was a little bit of bad news because he carried a revolver and a knife, and he decided to pull that out and wave it out in front of everybody. So the police were called, and a policeman wanted to arrest him. What did Cobb do? He shot the policeman. Not a good idea. However, he did manage to grab a horse and get away. Where was Cobb headed on his horse? Southwest. What is southwest of Topeka? That's right, Winfield. So, law enforcement officers sent a telegram to Winfield's sheriff, whose name was Sheriff Sheneman. Did they know he was going to Winfield? No. But they thought that maybe he was going to Hunnewell, which was a cattle loading point, and then would go on to Texas. So they made sure everybody in the surrounding knew that he had shot a cop and was a wanted man. When did all this happen? 137 years ago, 1883, during the Wild West times. So when Cobb shot that police officer at the dance, it was January 13th, 1883. On January 15th, sure enough, he showed up in Winfield, but then he headed towards Udall. Now, Charles Cobb went a little bit north of Udall to an area called Maple Township. To be exact, he stopped at a farm that was owned by a Mr. and Mrs. Jacobus. Since I don't know exactly where that farm was, I indicated the general Maple Township area in this map with a red arrow. So you can have some reference to the distances. I indicated Udall with a green arrow and Winfield with a blue arrow. Cobb knew that he was a wanted man because he was seen stopping at a wanted poster that had his face on it. He introduced himself to the Jacobus family as Mr. Smith. He said he was a cowboy that had just finished a job and asked if he could work for them until spring. When they said they didn't need any help, he asked if he could stay with them for a week, offering to pay for the room and meals, kind of like a hotel. They agreed to let him stay there. Mr. and Mrs. Jacobus noticed that Cobb carried guns and slept with a revolver under his pillow, but they thought that was just him being a cowboy. Meanwhile, Sheriff Sheneman in Winfield was not lazy, and he gave out a bunch of cards with Cobb's description on them, and he offered a reward. Back at the farm, there was another person living with the Jacobus family. He had also rented a room, and he was, guess what, a teacher. He happened to get one of those cards that the sheriff had given out, and he noticed that Cobb matched the description. So he went to Winfield and told the sheriff, hey, listen, I think this guy is living with us at the Jacobus farm. Gotta watch those teachers, man. They've got eyes on the back of their heads. So this was on a Monday that the teacher took that trip and told the sheriff. Next morning, on Tuesday, Sheriff Sheneman went to the farm with his horse and buggy and decided to take a look for himself. Now, of course, he didn't want to go in there and say, oh, hey, I'm the sheriff. Are you Charles Cobb, the guy we're looking for? No. He told Mr. Jacobus, okay, I'm going to go in there. I'm going to introduce myself as a doctor. I'm going to get a good look at this guy and see if it's him. So he did that, and he noticed, yeah, Cobb's the one we're looking for. So Cobb started heading for the door, and Sheneman did not want to draw his weapon on a young kid like Charles Cobb, so he decided to jump him from the back. Well, Cobb pulled his gun and shot backwards and shot Sheriff Sheneman twice in the gut. He then gave up and said, "Oh, I didn't want to kill him. You got me." And the teacher and Mr. Jacobus managed to tie up Cobb, and then they tended to Sheneman. And he was so badly hurt that they could not move him. So they sent for law enforcement officers, and they came, and they decided they were going to take Cobb back to Winfield to jail in the sheriff's horse and buggy because he could not go anywhere. He had to stay there because he was so badly hurt. Now remember, this was a time where there were no ambulances, there were no helicopters, there were no operating rooms with a surgical team. It was horse and buggy, and if you were lucky, you could get to an old-fashioned doctor's office. So the plan was to take Cobb back to Winfield, but what the law enforcement officers did not know was that a wagon load of men was waiting for them. They had heard about the shooting of Sheriff Sheneman, and they were waiting about around here where the fairgrounds are, a mile outside of town. They were going to take matters into their own hands. They were not going to let Cobb have a trial. No, they were going to take care of business right then and there. When the police officers saw that wagon load of men, they knew it was bad news. So they started running the horse that was pulling the buggy, and they just went for it. Since the buggy is much lighter than a wagon, they made an escape. They knew they could not go to the jail to put Cobb in his jail cell because the jail was surrounded by people also, so they were able to find a woodshed that they hid out in with Cobb. They had to wait until way after midnight until the people that were surrounding the jail finally went home so that they could put Cobb into a jail cell. We're at early Wednesday morning now when Cobb finally arrived at the Winfield jail. Sheriff Sheneman was expected to not make it. He did live for 2 more days and died 2 days after his gunshot wounds, during which he gave interviews to reporters from the Winfield Courier and other newspapers and was visited by his family, so he was one tough cookie. The police knew that it was dangerous for Cobb to stay in Winfield once Sheneman had died, so they were being preventative. They wanted him to have a trial and to stand trial, and in order to do so, they decided to move him to Wichita, to the jail there, on Wednesday evening. But Cobb was still supposed to come back to Winfield so he could stand trial. So on Saturday, the police tried to bring him back again to Winfield, but somehow word got out and they did not make it to Winfield. They turned back around and took him back to Wichita for his own safety. That was January 27th. On January 31st, they tried again to take Cobb to Winfield, and this time they succeeded. He made it to the jail. All was quiet that night at first. Later that evening, a group of men in black masks stormed the jail. They were armed. They took out their weapons. They threatened the sheriff that was there and forced him to hand over the keys to Cobb's jail cell. So this is the Cowley County Courthouse here in Winfield. Of course, it did not look like this back then. This is what the old courthouse looked like. It was in the same location, but a different building than you see today. Cobb was housed in the jail here at the courthouse. This is where the group of masked men got him out and marched him up 9th Street to Main Street and then took him north to 8th Street and then west to the railroad bridge. We are now west of Winfield, trying to find the railroad bridge that the mob took Cobb to. As you can see, this is not a fun road to be on. Oh. Okay, we don't really know if this is the location, but I've enlisted the help of my dad to figure out where this bridge was. This is a railroad bridge over the Walnut River, as you can see. Hopefully my trusty filmer is showing the river. Okay. So this is my dad back when he was a rapper. Now he just mostly fiddles around. Anyways, he's 82 years old and has to stay home because of the coronavirus. And he loves railroads, especially old railroads. He also likes to look at maps, just like I do. So I asked him if he could do some detective work and find out where this bridge was that the mob of men took Cobb to. So he found some old pictures on the internet, and we had the clue that the bridge had to be close to 8th Street because that's where the mob marched Cobb to, if you remember from the previous little segment. So, like I said, we are not 100% sure if this is the correct location. For sure, it's not the bridge that was there during the Cobb incident, because this bridge was built in the 1900s. My dad thinks probably to be able to take the weight of the new steam engines, which were heavier than the old ones. Okay, pilot, take us back. We never did discuss what exactly happened at that bridge. Well, the masked men had already prepared a noose, and when they reached the bridge, they hanged Cobb between some of the rails until he was dead. And they left the body up there. They left him hanging until the coroner came, and they guarded the body. It took a few hours for word to get to the coroner for him to come and cut the body down, and during that time hundreds of citizens came to view the body. That is what you call a lynching, when somebody is put to death without a trial by citizens who think that that person has committed a crime and want to take matters into their own hands. Now, if you remember, 3 days before Cobb was lynched, Sheneman had died. He was buried at Union Cemetery in Winfield, and his funeral was attended by hundreds of people. It was the biggest funeral in the state of Kansas up to date. We are now at Union Cemetery in Winfield to find Sheriff Sheneman's grave. And here it is. This is where he was buried. It's a very simple tombstone in the sense that there's not much writing on it. It's very tall and prominent, but all there's to it is his name and a little plaque. By the way, there was an investigation into the identity of the masked men, but they were never found. The father of Cobb was informed of his son's death, and he asked that the body be boxed up and sent to him. The coroner sent the body by train to the father's hometown. It was rumored that Cobb was a nephew of an ex-congressman. And that, my friends, is the end of today's story. That was just part 1. Stay tuned for part 2 of Murder and Drama in Cowley County next week. I'd like to thank Bill Botdorf for his fabulous website from which I got a lot of information. And now we will end with a quote from Bob Marley or Eric Clapton, whomever you like better.